My guest today is Brittany Loney, the founder and CEO of Elite Cognition. Brittany has almost 20 years of experience training high-performing operators from communities as diverse as elite warriors, professional Olympic athletes, high-level coaches, and corporate executives. She also has over 14 years of experience training special operations forces and was the first cognitive performance coach embedded with the United States Special Operations Command Tactical Human Optimization and a Rapid Rehabilitation and Reconditioning program, also known as Thor 3. Her work has been featured in the Harvard Business Review, peer-reviewed academic journals, textbooks, Success magazines, SOCOM SOFcast, and various other programs. In addition, Brittany has been a panel member or guest speaker at Global SOF Week, Special Operations Medical Association, SOCOM's Wellness Week, Air Force Air Education and Training Command Learning Professionals Consortium, Women in SOF Symposium, and countless other professional conferences. Brittany has a PhD in Educational Psychology and Learning Systems from the Florida State University, an MA in Kinesiology with an emphasis on sports psychology from California State University, Fresno, an MS in Exercise Science from Florida State University, and a BS in Criminal Justice from Texas State University, where she was also an NCAA Division I basketball player. Brittany lives her profession, spending much of her time working out, ultra running, hiking, paddling, boarding, and researching neuroscience, performance, and cognition. I was first introduced to Brittany by some of our nation's best tactical operators. Her work with USASOC units is unique in its approach to improving operator performance through physical, cognitive, and emotional training. I'm extremely excited to have her on the podcast because the broad scope and structure of her work will actually lay a foundation for several episodes to come on improving operator performance. I hope you enjoy my chat with Brittany Loney. My name is John Becker. For the past 4 decades, I've dedicated my life to protecting tactical operators. During this time, I've worked with many of the world's top law enforcement and military units. As a result, I've had the privilege of working with the amazing leaders who take teams into the world's most dangerous situations. The goal of this podcast is to share their stories in hopes of making us all better leaders, better thinkers, and better people. Welcome to the Debrief. Brittany, thanks so much for being with me today. I'm excited to talk to you.
I'm excited as well. Thank you for having me.
So why don't we, I read your resume in the intro, but let's kind of start with Brittany's origin story. Like, how do you get interested in cognition and then how do you end up working with tactical operators?
So way back in college, I was playing basketball and I got 4 major head injuries that gave me brain damage on CAT scans. And the last one, I was told by the neurologist that I'll never play basketball again. And I had thought basketball was my present, my future. It was really all that was ever on my mind. So I ended up seeing a counselor at the time that my coach made me go see. I was very reluctant at first because I was always that athlete in the background who was thinking the cognitive isn't for me. That's for people who can't physically hack it. You know, any excuse. I mean, I was, arrogant 20, 21-year-old. And then I get some sense knocked into me. I go see a counselor and I really did need it. And he introduces me to performance psychology. And at first I was like, no, thank you. And I did tell him exactly my words of, that's for people who can't physically hack it. And he looked at me, he goes, guess what? You can't anymore. And I was like, well, touche. That was a good response. So I will go and research whatever you want me to research now. So I go and I research performance psychology and I actually fell in love with the field. And my coach at the time was awesome. She kept me involved with the team and she had me take the freshmen and I could start practicing these new techniques I was learning about performance psychology. And I had them start with imagery and mental rehearsals and those type of things. And I actually switched my complete trajectory of my career. I wanted to be a defense attorney ever since I was little. And I gave up that. I finished the degree, but I ended up going another route, and it was studying the brain and how it performs best. So I went to grad school in that direction, and I actually tried to join every service, and I was denied by every service because of my head injuries. I mean, it made sense. But I always had this draw to the military. I was in JROTC when I was in high school. Like, it felt like who I was. And then when I was denied, I kind of gave up on that aspect as well. And I was like, well, I guess I'll work with athletes. But I went to a conference, and it was while I was in grad school, and they were looking for people to work with the Army. And the Army had just started up their Army Center for Enhanced Performance, ACEP. It stemmed out of West Point, and I got hired on. I actually left grad school early, and I told them I'll finish my dissertation while I'm there. And they were like, no, you won't. 10 years later, I did end up finishing. It was a lot more delayed than expected. But I went to Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, in 2010. And that's where it all started. And I really fell in love with the field in that community because I was working with people I really respected, and I respected the service. And it instilled this character-based performance because my site manager was very much on the character side. So that's where everything got launched, was from head injuries to changing a career field to a conference. And then I was at Fort Liberty.
Well, I think one of the things we share a common friend that introduced us, who's in one of the world's most elite units, put it that way. And one of the things that he said when he first said, oh, you've got to talk to Brittany, is he said, this is not psychology to make you forget how your mom acted. This is psychology to make your brain work, function better. And it started me on this kind of deep dive about performance psychology. Like, I'm familiar with it from athletics. I'm familiar with it from racing cars and that. But it's a really interesting field. And I don't think that the majority of people, even in the tactical community, are aware how much effort USASOC is putting into building better warriors.
Yeah, they're putting a lot. They're putting their money where the mouth is. They started, probably before I even got to third group. I was actually the first performance psychologist with third group. And during that time, it was Thor 3, and there was no POTFF at that time. And everything was just kind of fizzling upward of, where this thing could go. And then when POTFF came, it went across the branches, and it went across also the different disciplines of strength and conditioning, performance dietitians, physical therapy, and then became cognitive performance. And then it built from there to spiritual performance and behavioral science. And it really, really expanded, and they're putting a lot of investment into that program.
For those that don't know, what is POTFF?
Preservation of the Force in Families. It is the performance, human performance, and also behavioral aspects of how do we preserve and enhance the performance of the force, and then also including their families in that.
Yeah. So the idea being, build the best warrior we can, support them as best we can, and try to make them last, and also hopefully, allow them to leave service and resume a normal life, unbroken from what they've done.
Exactly.
I think it's probably not a bad idea for us to give a big, kind of big picture look at your work and kind of what the objectives that you drive towards when you're working with a team or unit. What are the big picture objectives in what you're trying to do with each unit you work with?
Yeah, so we're a brain-centered human performance program. You can think of cognitive performance in that way, whereas typically and historically, human performance programs put the physical body at the center, and it made sense, but we kind of flipped that a little bit, and let's put the brain at the center. So what we're looking to do is build performance capacity through skill development, and then we're looking at the mission and how can we help someone acquire those skills in a way that they can apply the skills in a mission-relevant manner? So we're always looking, what is the end state that this person is trying to reach? And then how do we help that person sustain reaching that performance capacity for 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years versus reaching that performance capacity and having only a couple years in them because of the op tempo and the stress and everything else that comes with the cost of this type of career.
So from a building the skills standpoint, building performance capacity, let's push on that a little bit. Why don't we start with cognitive skills? What do you mean by cognitive skills?
So I would look at what does the person have to do? And like a strength and conditioning coach, if they're working with a football player, they will look at a running back very different than a lineman in terms of physical capacity they have to build up. And we do the same with the cognitive aspect. So some cognitive skills include observation and situational awareness, memory skills, dynamic decision-making, critical and creative thinking, judgment, all the things that we tend to want our brains to do better. We call these like the hard skills of our program. So we're looking, what does this mission require? And how do we train that person in a cognitive way to get better at that? Just like a strength and conditioning coach would do with the body.
So, I know that until, not that long ago, we used to think that your cognitive capacity was your cognitive capacity, right? Until UCSF finds neuroplasticity as a concept where you can reshape the brain. We used to think, well, if Britney's a 72 IQ, that's what she is, and that's what she's going to be. This is all really new emerging science.
Yes, it is. It's past 15-ish years where we've realized the brain can change itself, and it changes itself with neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. It literally will create new brain cells and change the chemical connection between those brain cells, and that impacts how we function and behave as human beings. A habit in and of itself is a series of connections that are now like 4-lane highways, and you no longer have to think about doing them. But if you want to change a habit, how do you get the weeds to grow in and start developing a new trail system that you can start traveling over and over? And you literally, when you're doing that, you are rewiring how the brain is functioning. And then lifestyle is impacting our neuroplasticity. I always give the analogy of heating up the brain. Exercise, nutrition, sleep, make our brains more plastic so that the cognitive training that we provide will actually take to a level that will show functional results on the battlefield.
So when we're talking about, like, I think we tend to think of our cognitive abilities as kind of fixed, right? Like it's you don't think, oh, well, I'm going to teach myself to be more observant, but you can.
Yes. If we couldn't, we'd be in trouble because whatever we're born with as babies, like, I don't know, I didn't come out of the womb a observational Jedi. I don't think anyone did. I think over time, we develop these cognitive skills, even from the smallest thing. When you mention observation, our observation skills developed from the time we were a baby. And if you think about putting a baby on the center of the floor, you could think of a niece or a nephew or your own kids, and you've got the sunlight shining through the blinds and it's moving a little bit, and the baby finds it very engaging, and you'll just see the baby watch the sunlight coming through on the floor. But then if a loved one walks through the door, what do we tend to do? We reorient the baby, and actually at that point, we're teaching the child how to observe the environment. What is more important than another thing? And our observation skills have developed not just from training, but also over our lifetime according to what our values were and are currently.
So it's funny as you're saying this, I'm thinking of John Boyd's OODA loop.
Yes.
Right, which is widely accepted tactical, pretty much any tactical community teaches the OODA loop. And the funny thing about it that has never struck me until right now with this conversation is the only part of that we really focus on training is the action. Most of the time when we're training tactical units, we're training them to act. We're not training them to observe, to orient, or to make the decisions.
I would say until now, we have the programs and the science that backs it up. And it made sense to train only the action when we didn't know that the brain could literally change itself. But I think we're progressing in the tactical space, at least where I've been, and the organizations that I know of are starting to consider, yes, how do we train this? We can train this. We've seen the differences between the groups. And now they're starting to invest the time in the 3 steps that come before that action, which are actually the most critical steps because those are the steps that are determining the action.
Yeah, and from a tactical law enforcement standpoint, it's usually not the action that gets cops in trouble or gets them killed. It's the 3 steps prior. It's the ability to orient and the ability to observe what's going on and to make the right decision. But yet, we do tend to, especially in tactical law enforcement, focus on just, we're going to make the team shoot better, we're going to make them move better, but we don't tend to spend a lot of time on, we're going to make them think better. We're going to make them, we're going to improve their sensory systems. So it's an interesting observation. Like I said, it hadn't hit me until we started talking about it.
Yeah, my dissertation was actually on dynamic decision making and it developed a model based on the research that was available at the time. And a lot of it is similar to the OODA loop. The first step of the dynamic decision making model, and there's 4 steps total, is attention allocation. So think that's like observe in the OODA loop. So what you pay attention to, relevant and irrelevant information, will determine how you anticipate that situation unfolding and how you will anticipate responding to that situation. So we allocate our attention, and that is something that's very trainable. That's where we spend most of our time because that's where 76% of errors in situational awareness actually tend to happen because the person primed the wrong mental model, anticipated what was happening incorrectly, because they didn't have the full breadth of information available, or they were actually considering irrelevant information in their decision making. So then after we anticipate, our brain pulls up a series of responses that we have access to at that time. And for experts, it's between 1 and 3. If you get more than that, you tend to go into overanalysis in that second. And then we execute that particular decision. And all of that is actually housed within what we call long-term working memory. And think of that just, what is the information in my head, the training and experience that I currently have access to? Now, you have a lot of training and experience in your head, but you don't always have access to it. And what limits the access to the information in any given moment is what your internal environment is doing. So think of this as your psychophysiological state, your mindset, your state of stress. All of that can actually degrade what mental models pulled up and the quality of the access to it. And really, that's where we see a lot of movement in helping people with dynamic decision making, is not only in attention control, but also in teaching someone the self-regulatory skills that in seconds they can get themselves from redlining and back to an area where they can take in the environment in a broad way and take in everything that is relevant and discard what is not, and then get back on track with the right decisions.
So let me just walk through a scenario then, because I want to kind of illustrate that in a couple of different ways. So if I always use the analogy of a rattlesnake. I use it to explain debriefs. The first guy that found a rattlesnake was bit by the rattlesnake. If he didn't tell anybody, the second guy that found a rattlesnake also got bit. But when the first time he's bit by the rattlesnake, he doesn't recognize it's a rattlesnake. So maybe he picks it up thinking it's a friendly animal, and it bites him. So now he knows rattlesnake, and he has a paradigm for rattlesnake. And so much of tactical decision making is paradigm recognition. It's pattern recognition. It's this thing is long and cylindrical and has a diamond-shaped head and a rattle on its tail. It's a rattlesnake. But if he walks in and looks at the rock next to the snake, because his attention is focused on the wrong thing, he still gets bit by the rattlesnake. So that attention focus, this first step of that, is we have to be looking at the right things, the things that actually matter. Is that correct so far?
Yes.
So then we've got to take it, we have to look at the right thing. So we're going to look at, instead of the rock next to the snake, we're going to look at the rattlesnake. And then we have to apply the paradigms or the patterns or the previous knowledge to recognize the threat for what it is. And then we have to make a decision on how to deal with the threat before we can even take action. I mean, that is observe, orient, decide, right? It's the beginning of the OODA loop. But all of that has to happen in the case of a tactical situation in milliseconds for us to be able to effectively neutralize a legitimate threat or not act on one that isn't a legitimate threat. The toddler with a squirt gun versus the, hardened gang member with a Glock are both people with guns. They're just very different situations.
Yes, that's 100% how you explained it. And that also lends the importance of outcome-based and scenario-based training. Is without that, if you're just training actions in isolation, then you never get to go through the OODA loop. And with scenario-based training, that's where you're truly creating those paradigms that you talked to. And then all the other experience on the street will factor into that. And if you have a poor experience, if you don't do something to help override it in a way, then that can become your primary response in the next situation because it's primed and ready. So there's also mechanisms for when the experience in the field actually or on the street doesn't go right in training or in reality. How are you then coping with that so then it doesn't keep happening and that same mistake doesn't occur over and over?
Yeah, it strikes me there's a couple, without even getting to your own internal regulatory environment, there's a couple of potential training scars there, right? If you've had a negative experience where you didn't do the right thing, you've now primed your brain to do the wrong thing again. But also if you've created training scars in the way you train. I think back, there was a shooting, California Highway Patrol, I think, had been training, I think it was Highway Patrol. It was a state patrol organization. They had a shooting and the officer drew his gun, fired 2 rounds that were ineffective and put his gun away. And they went back and they said, well, why would he have put his gun away without reassessing? Well, because the way they trained is they fired 2 rounds and put their guns away. And so when he defaulted to what he had, to the training scar he had created under pressure, that was exactly what happened. So it strikes me that if we're not really paying attention to the way we're training, we might actually be training bad responses and increasing the likelihood of an error.
Yes, this is where, if you've read On Combat, where Grossman talks quite a bit about what the military did. And then I think he also did some work with police officers to help mitigate some of those training scars because they were noticing the same type of thing. Is this the automatic response was a thing that they trained the most. And usually what you train is what you experience more than in reality. So yeah, you can create unnecessary training scars. And it's not that you don't want to avoid making mistakes in training. I mean, you don't want to intentionally go try to make one, but you also, that lends to the importance of how do you correct that mistake in training right after it has happened so it doesn't become the primary blueprint for that person. Because you want to be in that stretch zone where failure may happen, because that's the only way you are going to get to that adaptive capacity is training in that stretch zone. But that stretch zone is also where failure can be highly likely. It's just how does that training then be delivered so that we can make that a correction in terms of what the brain will refer back to in the future.
Which is interesting, right? Because you become a better skier by falling down. And it is very easy. I remember when I first started racing cars, I had this morning, the first 2 days of testing were terrible. And I had this morning where I didn't go off the track. I felt like I was a god. I mean, I was no problems, didn't go off track, didn't spin the race car. I got this. And I walked in, sat down with my coach, and he's like, how'd the morning go? I said, man, I nailed it. Like I never went off track. And he goes, yeah, because you're slow. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, being fast is being on the edge. That's the point. If you never are on the edge, you don't get any better, right? So we do in training need to push the limits, but then the next step is when we spin the race car, we need to debrief, do an after action, and actually learn the lesson. And I think that's a place that we tend to make a lot of mistakes. We make the mistake, but we don't come back and go, hey, what happened? Why did it happen? How do we correct it?
Yes, and the thing that we've added into those debriefs are a mental rehearsal. You might not be able to replay that whole scenario and go through it again, but you've had your effective debrief. It's not then leave, you've learned your lesson. It's take the moment before you leave that debrief and do a mental rehearsal of you getting it correct. And we actually encourage people to do that about 3 times. It doesn't technically override the memory. It just helps to imprint the correction just as much as what the error had happened. So that's what I would say needs to be added to debriefs are time for really quick, doesn't have to be long and drawn out, a quick mental rehearsal of where did the critical error occur and have them rehearse getting that right.
So I roll in and I don't shoot scenario and accidentally shoot a hostage. Obviously, we need to have a conversation about why I shot a hostage, but then step back and visualize yourself making the correct decision at least 3 times. Just run the scenario again and teach your brain, hey, this is the way it's supposed to look.
Yes, and with the focus on the attentional component, because when you're running it back in that shoot, no shoot, and you shot the hostage, you're probably seeing the exact situation that you just had, which is now known. And when you went into it, it was an unknown. And usually the root of that particular error of shooting the hostage is probably a sensory error, an attention error. So that's where I would really make sure it's not just about going in and having the correction of I don't pull the trigger on that particular person in the environment, but my attention is at the level of where I can pick that information up correctly to not shoot the individual, because you don't know where they're going to be next time.
It's funny. Same racing coach was in a track, and I'm struggling with a really high speed turn. It's like 155 mile an hour turn. And the car is really on the edge at that speed, and it's scary, and you feel like you're going to lose it. And I'm going through it about 145. And he's like, it's 155 mile an hour turn. And I said, yeah, no, it's 145. He goes, no, it's 155. I'll go drive it in your car and show you it's 155. And we finished for the day, and he's like, okay, before tomorrow, what I want you to do is before you go to sleep tonight, I want you to lay in bed, and I want you to picture yourself driving that turn and looking down. And there's no speedometer in a race car, but he's like, I want you to pretend there's a speedometer, and I want you to look at it, and it says 155. Every time it says 155. Picture yourself there, look at it, and I'm like, yeah, okay, this is bullshit. This is never going to work. But I did it like 5 or 6 times, got up the next morning, went through the turn at 154 miles an hour, and felt no different. And it was the first time that
crazy.
I was like, oh, this isn't voodoo science. Like this actually works.
Yeah, and it works if you work it. Sometimes people just, I'll go check the block and put in my 3 mental rehearsals, but like really do it hastily. So there's a quality component to it. And if you don't truly give it a shot and like go all in, yeah, you might not see the benefits because you're just going through the motions. And when have you ever got anything out of going through the motions in any task? So yeah, having that quality mental rehearsal, and then also trusting yourself in that next moment to be able to be in that stretch zone. And actually the stretch zone is also known as the adaptability corridor. And it is where you build adaptive capacity for being able to respond effectively in very dynamic, ambiguous environments.
So talk to me, that was our second point. So you beautifully segued. Talk to me about adaptive capacity. What does that mean?
So there's really 3 different aspects to adaptability. And you have intellectual adaptability, which would be, can I effectively reorient my thinking based on new information that I didn't have when I initially made up my mind about something? And then we have interpersonal. Can I flex my communication and my interpersonal style to the situation at hand to be effective, even if it's not the dominant way I like to be? And then self-regulatory would be another component. Are you able to regulate yourself so that you can react effectively? And then I know we didn't really speak about this, but there are 2 different forms of adaptability. There's proactive and reactive. A lot of times when we think about adaptability, we think about the reactive kind. Can somebody respond effectively to the changing environment? But actually, a lot of the ability to respond effectively happened in planning. And not that the plan was executed exactly as it is, because usually it's not, but the act of planning actually prepares the brain and gives a mental blueprint that helps the person respond off of. So it's not that the plan was the thing that worked, it was the act of planning created additional adaptability because the person actually thought through those different courses of action as they were planning things out.
So, well, that's really interesting because you tend to think of planning as like, oh yeah, we're just going to figure out how we're going to go there. But I had never really thought about the fact that I guess in a plan, you are rehearsing the operation, right? As we're thinking through what we're going to do, we are not only rehearsing what we're going to do, but we're also considering the contingencies.
Exactly.
Right?
You're if-thenning it right then, and you're starting to create the mental pathways for these if-thens, even if that's not what you initially thought was going to happen, and maybe that wasn't the primary plan. But even if it was subconsciously, you're actually starting to create your PACE plan and get your alternative and contingency and emergency actions ready to go, whether you were thinking you were doing that or not.
You slipped in a term there that I think some people won't know, which is PACE.
Yeah, so it's the primary, alternative, what's the C? I just
contingency.
missed the C. Contingency and emergency. And it's usually used with communication where you have your PACE plan. But I think when you plan well, you actually start to create PACE plans for various actions, because you started to create these threads of different avenues you could actually travel as the environment unfolds. What tends to happen, though, when people think the planning is just about the plan, they become married to the plan. And that's actually when you start to see some rigidity. So I'm not saying, the answer is always in the plan. The answer is always in the act of planning. Hopefully that distinction makes sense.
Yeah, no. So simply the act of planning, right? It's kind of like education, right? Like you go through an educational process, like, doing, I am never again going to use, trigonometry, but using my brain to do trigonometry changed my brain, right? It made my brain operate differently. They say in law school, you're not going to learn how to practice law. You're going to learn to think like a lawyer. And I think it is that, like, the process of planning is forcing you to go through those contingencies. And it's funny because I've had the privilege of going out on ops with a lot of the world's most elite units. And the one consistent thing in the really good units is the level of planning and discussion and contingency planning is staggering. I sat through with a national level asset for another country, a European country, through one their warm up brief and then their actual op, and the brief was, here is the photograph of the local trauma center. Here's where you drive in. Here's what the emergency room looks like. I thought, man, this is a really high level of planning. But the more debriefs I hear, the more I find people don't know. They get there, they're not sure. And it's just, you're just kind of laying foundation for your brain to turn to when an emergency happens.
Yes. And then I think you mentioned the part of the photographs, and I think a large part of it, especially in ambiguous environments, is, yes, there's a ton of unknown. We already know that, but sometimes people use that as the cop-out not to plan. Well, there's just so much that's unknown, I'm not going to plan. But planning's also about, what are the knowns? Get an image of the little things. They might seem very little, but as you're learning the knowns, and it might just be the layout of something, you're starting to actually degrade the stress response that's associated with so much unknown, because you have something to fall back on. And as the situation's unfolding, your brain starts to tack things onto the knowns that you had from planning as well. So you're actually in some way reducing ambiguity. Actually, that is what you're doing. By just those little things that are the knowns will go a long, long way.
So we're reducing the number of variables, like in a chaotic environment, right?
Yes,
like,
and anytime, even if you can reduce one, you're going to free up more cognitive load to adapt.
Because all of those things, right? Every unknown, when something goes sideways, every unknown is where the chaos comes from. And your brain, I think of it, as we're talking through this, I think of like a flashbang, right? The real effect of a flashbang is that your body all of a sudden has 8,000 things to listen to, and takes that minute to go, hold on, what the hell's going on? And just kind of stop everything. And that's what's going to happen in a chaotic environment, right? Your brain is going to go, hold on, and try to solve for all those variables. So everything you can solve for, your brain doesn't need to consider when things go sideways.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. So continuing then on kind of building capacity, you touched on interpersonally. What does that mean?
So interpersonal adaptability would be how you are behaviorally communicating. Doesn't mean you're changing your personality, because a lot of times people go, oh, I'm not going to change who I am and this and that. You're really just flexing your outward demonstration of how you're communicating, whether it be voice tone, volume, use of gestures, those type of things. So you're communicating in a way that, one, is effective for the situation. So how you communicate in an emergency situation is very different than non-emergency. And sometimes we'll try to apply emergency communication to non-emergency situations. And then that's where everybody, just terms that person the a-hole of the team. So there is a distinction there. But then also having the wherewithal of the social awareness, and you can even go into the OODA loop on this. You're having to observe and orient to that environment in a social manner to figure out what is my best approach in this situation that may either de-escalate what the response has to be, or at least keeps it from escalating one step further. So it's really adjusting how you are in that environment in terms of really emotional intelligence.
Yeah, well, and I think you see this, you can look at any of the great catastrophic events from law enforcement that have driven national policy change, and George Floyd being the one that immediately comes to mind. Chauvin was emotionally way overmodulated, and was still addressing the threat as though it was going to kill him, even though at one point George Floyd is unconscious, right? So it is that kind of recognizing that every situation requires a different response. And being able to tune that response emotionally to the situation you're confronted with.
Exactly. It's really hard to interpersonally adapt when you yourself on a stress level are incapable of modulating that because you're at such a heightened state. And in the example that you just gave, it almost sounds like he got stuck in act and didn't go back through that OODA loop to observe and orient to know how do I respond? It was an action that was the initial reaction that became the perpetuated action.
Yeah, and I think that emotional state drives so much of our physiological state too, right? Like it's the ability to adapt to varying physiological loads. Like it always strikes me. You hear a pilot whose plane is on fire and they have trained it so long that, they're on fire and barely going to make the runway, and they sound like they're reading a grocery list as they're giving commands, because they have built that skill set to control themselves emotionally. And it's always fascinating to me that you see people that have that adaptive ability in their emotions.
Yeah, and just if you look also at the time in simulators, and I mean, the expansiveness of being able to practice that emotional regulation in situations that were very close to what they also faced, I think that's critical as well. But when it comes to emotions and physiology, you really can't separate them. They drive each other. There's a reciprocal relationship. Our physiological state will drive our emotional state, and our emotional state drives our physiological state. We know that there's a hormonal signature to every emotion, and we are always experiencing an emotion, whether we're conscious of it or not. And that emotion, there's no way you can extract emotion from decision-making. It is impossible. We are emotional beings. And many times when I hear, I didn't make that decision on emotion, as humans, we actually need emotion to be able to make decisions. Without emotion, we're actually horrible problem solvers because we don't know what to prioritize. So rather than looking at it as something that degrades decision-making, it's how can you regulate your emotional response so it's in the place it needs to be so that you can actually make better decisions.
So it's kind of a self-regulatory component. It's controlling physiology and emotions, and creating an environment where you're going to perform optimally.
Yes, and that's actually what we term a top-down and a bottom-up approach. We will teach everyone who comes through our training the bottom up is the breath control, which most people by this point are very familiar with. You have box breathing, you have even 5 inhale, 5-second exhales. There's a whole host of different types. And we use biofeedback to help someone train to see, well, what technique is best for me? Because my technique that works best for bottom up self-regulation for me is probably very different than yours, John. There's going to be some overlap, but we'll use the biofeedback to help inform that.
It's a really interesting concept to think that, U.S. special operators are sitting around looking at, heart rate and other, other biofeedback factors and learning the mechanism that works best to control their physiology and emotion. I think that it would surprise the majority of people to hear that is a skill set that we're practicing. I mean, people hear breathing, but I don't think the majority of people believe it. But it sounds like in your work, you guys have not only believe it, you're relying on it heavily.
Yes. And we're using a top-down approach too. So we'll rely on it heavily, but without exclusion to the way that you interpret the situation matters. And we all have habitual ways of which we interpret the world around us. We create narratives and we tend to overlay the same narrative across many situations. And in some situations, it's effective. However, in other situations, it might be highly ineffective. So we actually teach all of our operators, we call them the 5 critical perceptions. And I'll go through them, but the important thing to remember is how you perceive the world outside of work influences how you perceive the world when you're in work. You can't have horrible perceptions and a non-regulated stress response out of work and then go into work and expect everything to just click on. But those 5 are here now. So that's about being present and process focused. It's not that you have to always be in the present focus, but in performance situations, that's where you need to be. And then after here now, we have as is, which is stripping our own narrative from the observations. We are usually the hero or the victim. We're at the center of all of our stories. And we tend to connect observational facts together with our narrative. Even though those things might have not been connected or have nothing to do with us, we are in a situation and we have these observations that are factually correct. They're just observations. And then we overlay our inferences and our narrative. So we actually teach people how to separate and know which is your narrative and which are the actual observational facts. And then teach them to see, sometimes there's another explanation rather than your narrative. And we'll practice that outside of, high performance situations so that when they're in that moment, they can intuitively see that there's alternative explanations to things. So then after as is, we have as granted, which is about not fighting reality. And yes, sometimes the world does suck. Actually, many times there's suffering, there is pain, but many times we also add suffering beyond what we have to experience from that situation. And we start to think we deserve or are entitled to a different reality than what exists for us now. And that can actually create very much a chronic stress response as people are just fighting reality. Because usually when they're fighting it, they're focused on all the things they can't control and that are out of their influence. And that just increases the overall stress response. So they enter a situation already at a heightened level of chronic stress, which makes the acute stress response easier to get out of control. And then after as granted, we have release, which would be releasing our attachments. And sometimes that attachment might be to perfection and how to move on after a mistake. And then other times it might be releasing the attachment of a loved one or even a situation or a job. It's seeing that there's power in impermanence. And without impermanence, it is hard to have joy. Yes, it brings us grief and a lot of other negative emotions, but it's also the only way we can experience joy. So we go over releasing and be able to move on from things. And then the last one is effortless virtuous action, which is living every day intentionally from your values and your virtue very, very deliberately, so that when the crucible moments happen, where your character is put to the test, it has been practiced so much that that is your automatic response. So yes, we have the breath work, but then we also really hone in on these 5 critical perceptions as a way to start perceiving the world so that when the hard situations happen, those have been trained as well.
Very interesting. Yeah, I want to come back to that when we talk about resilience a little bit, because I feel like that kind of all ties together. So pulling back to building performance capacity. So we had cognitive, we have adaptive capacity, which is, the self-regulatory, the interpersonal, the intellectual. And then what about stress tolerance? Talk to me about stress tolerance.
Well, that kind of feeds into the self-regulatory. It's where we're teaching the person how to actually have more reservoir to deal with stress. So we talk about stress tolerance in terms of how stressed the person currently is. We call that actually stress expenditure. So how much am I putting towards this situation? And then there's a stress reservoir. And the reservoir is how much gas is left in my tank to continue dealing with situations that may be hard. And the stress reservoir was actually our newest concept. And it came out of realizing that stress expenditure or your stress level didn't tell us the whole story about who performed well over time. And we were seeing that there were many people who could perform exceptionally well under high physiological stress responses. And we don't mess with that. If the person's performing well, making good decisions, that might be their optimal zone they need to function at. But then we also started to look at, well, how much do they have left in the tank? If something else were to happen on this shift, how much reservoir do they have left to actually be able to deal with it? And we saw that those weren't always compatible. Those who performed really well under high stress, hey, they're still performing well. Sometimes they had a low stress reservoir. And if one more thing happened, it would have pushed them over that edge. So we help people train both of those. How do you perform well under stress? And then how do you make sure you have more left in the tank should something unexpected happen that requires you to still be at that optimal performance level?
That's really interesting. And we'll probably come back to that with resilience too, because it is, it's stress. You tend to think of stress like, oh, he's really good under stress, but he's really good under stress when he has a happy, healthy home life and he sleeps well and he's physiologically fit and, he's not sick and his kids are healthy is a very different response than he's in the process of getting divorced and hasn't slept in 3 days and drinks too much.
Yes.
And, it is that I think we tend to view that with a very fixed mindset also. Like, oh, that guy's
I
good
think
under
it's
pressure.
starting to be viewed as part of the culture, and that's what I signed up for.
Yeah.
And I don't think it has to be. I know it's hard. I'm not minimizing how hard it would be to try to maintain everything. But I don't think the answer is, well, that's how it has to be. I think there is a solution out there that can be worked to maybe it can be a lower percentage of people who have to function that way.
Yeah, it's funny because to some degree it becomes almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like if you don't take care of yourself, you are more likely to find yourself in a situation that will stress your stress capability, that will drain that reservoir, and then and the more you put yourself into that loop, and you don't recover from the stress. It's almost like somebody who gets injured and continues to push hard with that injury. Like it's never going to get better. You've got to heal it and you've got to refill the reservoir. And I think we tend to forget that.
Yeah. And I think I'm glad you mentioned the home life, because I think sometimes the stress reservoir is really low. Maybe there are a few high stress things that happen on the shift and they dealt with them effectively, but then they have degraded the stress reservoir. So now they're going home with an emptied reservoir, and then something happens that it might be relatively minor in the scheme of things, but that's the thing that pushes the person over the edge. And then there's this outburst and they're just not handling it well. So it's what can we do to help shut down after each high stress event? Because then you're kind of refilling the reservoir little by little, not fully, but little by little. So you have more at the end of the day. And then the most work that I've actually done that people have found highly effective are transition home routines. And a lot of that is, let's pour a little bit more into that stress reservoir. So when you get home, you have more capacity and you're not just drained in a shell of a person at that point.
Yeah, it's funny. I started implementing like a transitional, my drive is very short. It's a couple of miles, but I've started implementing like a transitional habit when I'm coming home. And when I interviewed one of the guys from BRI that was involved in Bataclan. And one of the most profound things he said at the end of the interview was that when a military operator, basically Bataclan is a military operation, it's got the level of death and destruction that a military operation would. But he said, the hard part is when you're deployed militarily, you come home, it takes you a few days to get home, and you're stopping here and you're doing this, and then you get home. He says, I came home from that event and my family was like, well, what happened? And he goes, it had been a 10-minute drive. Like I just went to bed. Like I couldn't talk about it. It's too much. And I think we, especially in law enforcement, tend to forget that the transition between those things doesn't really provide an opportunity in many cases to refill that reservoir, and that reservoir cannot be filled with bourbon.
Yeah. And I think that is a big distinction between military and police is they're also living in the environment where the things have happened. So there's the constant triggering of now there's this extra low-lying stress that's there. Maybe it's not even low-lying at times, especially if it's a recent event and you're on your day off and you go by that area and it's like just triggers you. And then there's that stress response continuing to kind of hit at that reservoir. So I actually think for police officers, because there's not the same amount of transition time as military members get, and military gets change of environment too, which I think is huge, not to minimize their experience, but I think that makes it even more critical that police officers and other first responders who are having to transition so quickly, have something that helps them fill that reservoir just a little bit more. I know it won't get capped off. It won't get full at the end of that day. But what is that thing that you're doing to help you transition so that your family doesn't always get the worst of you, so you don't always feel so depleted by the end of a shift? What can help fill that cup a little bit? Might not be optimal, but a little bit is better than nothing.
Well, and that kind of brings us to the fourth pillar of building performance capacity, right? Which is this idea of high performance habits. Talk to me about that a little bit.
The high performance habits, I think, are just the series of all the different things that we talk about, from mindset to stress tolerance to even intellectual adaptability. It's creating habit out of them. And how do you work these techniques, tools into systems that are done consistently over time? It's not, none of these things are a one-time thing and then you've summited and you're done and you never have to do it again. All of them have to be habits. Now, there's going to be some tools that you'll use in certain situations and not in others. But really, high performance is a series of decisions that you consistently make over a long period of time that help sustain you. So it's changing the mindset from implementing a tool to creating systems and processes that become habits in your life.
Okay, so we've kind of talked about building performance capacity. I tend to think of this in like, we're going to build the operator, we're going to make him shoot well, we're going to make him move well, we're going to give him the ability to make decisions. But then there's also the ability to access those skills and capabilities when the flag goes up. So talk to me a little bit about that.
So that starts in skill acquisition as well. And I make that distinction because many times in our field, we'll have people come to us and they want the tools for the mission, for the game, for the shift, whatever it is. And I really want to make certain that those habits are acquired away from the situation that really matters. And then the ability to transfer those into the moment that really matters, that's where you actually start to see the magic happen. But you don't get to application without putting in the time to actually build up the performance capacity. And in our field, many people think that they can do that. Like, let me just jump to, using this when I need it the most. And what we actually teach people to do is progressively start applying those habits, the tools, techniques, procedures, everything they were learning and building the capacity. And we'll start to shift that to how does that work in this specific mission, in this specific task, in this shift, whatever the situation might be. So we actually start to get into more scenario-like integration of the skills, and then start to build into, okay, now it's the mission and you're ready to apply it. So it's very progressive, as any skill would be. When you learn how to shoot, you learn how to shoot where there's not many distractions and you have one task in front of you. Same here, but then you don't get to the point where you can navigate a shoot house effectively without having done that. So that's really what the application comes down to. You've put in the reps to build the capacity, and you're shifting from what we call a training mindset, which is very analytical. You're really looking for those little things to fine tune all through the training. Almost a bit of a perfectionist mentality there. But when it comes to application, it's a trusting mindset that will help someone kind of be in that zone that you hear a lot of people talk about. When everything was flowing, the decisions just seemed to be right, the environment slowed down. That's because the person was able to trust themselves and turn off analytical mode. So when we get to actually living the performance capacity that they've built, a lot of our work is actually around trusting the performance capacity that they've been able to build and not interrupting it from happening at the level that they've built it, which is what most people do. Is we have this very high potential and we interrupt it with over-analysis.
Yeah, and paralysis by analysis, as I like to refer to it. It's interesting because I had the privilege to interview Earl Plumley, who's a first Special Forces Group recipient of the Medal of Honor. And Earl was involved in a just horrific situation that I still to this day don't understand how he survived. And his performance was unbelievable. But when you hear him talk about the events, Earl is an extremely humble guy. It was one of the funniest interviews I've ever done. I mean, he's describing grenades bouncing off of his chest as something hit me. And I was like, that's not my grenade. It doesn't have a pin in it. You hear the way he describes it, and his mind was so far past the actions he was taking. It was so far, like he describes the recognition that he was too focused on shooting because he started to see the brass coming out of his gun. And his brain was like, okay, I need to back off because I'm too focused on my front sight. And it was just this, you got the impression that so much of that performance came from his ability to disassociate from all of the skills he had learned and focus solely on the application of the skills. And it ties very much to what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's this complete immersion in the moment. And nothing else is entering the mind or taking up any part of the brain's load at that time. This complete presence is essentially what you're training people to be able to do. And when you get into over-analysis mode during execution that needs to be trusted, you are actually using parts of the brain that need to be offloaded to be able to perform in the environment that they're in, and then trust that you've intuitively trained yourself to respond effectively in those situations. And that's where, when we go back to those 5 critical perceptions we talked about earlier, usually it's one of those 5 things going wrong that causes us to actually interrupt our performance. So the here now is all about the presence in the process. Many times people are overly focused on the consequence or the outcome, and they forget pieces of the process and the foundations and the fundamentals and just being in the moment to be able to respond. They're on fast forward on what's going to happen because of this or what could happen in this situation. So we have to go back to controlling the thought piece to keep us in the present moment and really immersed in that environment. And we do a lot of that actually through pre-performance routines, or in this case, it would be like a pre-shift routine where the person is getting themselves into that optimal psychophysiological state. It could be through music, it could be through breath control, through the thought component. Everyone kind of has their unique way to get themselves where they need to be mentally and physiologically to be able to perform well. That's really where those moments start application of them, because that's what allows you to start trusting. And it's also, if you find yourself too self-focused in those moments of execution, either you're ruminating about your past mistake or you're just, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Bring it outward, either on the situation or on someone else, service to others, those who are around you. And it's really, really hard to interrupt your own performance when you're not focused on yourself. So we actually call trusting mindset is very much an ego-less state of mind. In training, the ego can drive someone to be better. Whereas when it comes to performance, the ego can drive someone to be worse a lot of times. So you have to transcend your ego to be fully immersed.
And it's interesting because, you talk about performance rituals, and like you see this in professional sports all the time, right? You see the Olympic diver or the Olympic track athlete that stands there with their eyes closed, or the gymnast, that you can see them mentally rehearsing their routine, or they're listening to music. Like, performance psychology is used widely in sports, but is not totally made the transition to this application. And it is, like you said, establishing the right mindset, moving into an operation in the right frame of mind is where that flow state comes from. It's where that, LeBron James, transcending the game, or Michael Jordan, or, Tiger Woods, or any of the people that we regard as just, Tom Brady, performing way above their, what you expect them to do. And it is that ability to just ignore the fact that there's 5 seconds left on the clock, ignore the fact that it's the fourth quarter, you're on the verge of losing the Super Bowl, and focus on the fact that you need to throw one pass really well.
Yes, that's a great analogy. And sometimes I hear in the tactical space of, well, I don't have time to do that. It's not about it having to be long and drawn out, because I think sometimes we see these long rituals of athletes and thinking it has to be the same. It doesn't. It's just about having momentary, we actually call them micro resets. And that's actually what most of our operators use, are these micro resets that keep their neurophysiology from getting out of control. It doesn't necessarily have to be pinpoint on this optimal state that's all the time. It just has to be within your control and practiced over time. And then those micro resets, they work in one breath. It's not this 10-minute, 5-minute, 1-minute routine. Sometimes it's one breath that recenters you.
So give me some examples of the kinds of things that you're teaching for micro resets. Like what are guys doing, as they're stacking on a door to prep themselves? Like what is an example of micro resetting?
A lot of the micro reset will be around breath, and then usually one very brief statement they'll say to themselves that has a meaning in terms of helps them get outside themselves or helps them get in the present moment. And it's different for everybody what that statement will be, but usually it's around a 1 to 3 breath routine that then ends in one statement that helps them get in that right frame of mind.
Very interesting.
And what we say with that 3 breath reset, the first breath, especially if, let's say you're still in your vehicle and you've got a brief moment you can take, the first breath is to get you back in the present. It's not necessarily to be controlled. Breath 1 is, let me reorient. Where are my feet? Where are my hands? Where am I? Like, just reorient, get present. The second breath, you're actually now starting to get more in that self-regulation. You're using the exhale to actually calm you down. That's really where our relaxation response gets a bit more activated, is on that exhale. And then breath 3 is an orientation to what is my next action or intention? How will I enter this situation? And that is the base technique that most of our people will adapt off of to create the one that works for them in their situations.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and I guess there's also probably an underlying habit component here, right? Like the things that you're doing that are preconditioning you to perform well.
Yes, and what should happen is you no longer have to really think about doing these things. These 3 breath resets in training should be practiced with training. It's not something you reserve for the performance moment. They start to become part of how you perform. And actually, a lot of the research goes into when you learn self-regulation skills with technical and tactical skills, they actually become encoded as one memory. So when you do the technical or tactical thing, the self-regulatory skills actually get primed with it, and you do those all part of it. So what we want to end up getting to is a state where self-regulation and cognitive control are habitual ways of operating that no longer take your thought away from the situation. Anything, when we're taking your thought away from the situation, even for a moment, we are taking your situational awareness. And that's why, for me, the building the performance capacity is so important, because I don't want you to go out and try all these techniques in the heat of the moment, because you're going to lose situational awareness doing it. They should become part of the way that you operate.
Yeah, but it's interesting. You raise a really interesting point there, which is that the ability to control your internal regulatory environment and the hardwiring of these habits and hardwiring of these techniques, you're freeing up cognitive capacity for situational awareness.
Yes, 100% that's what you're doing. And you're actually increasing your capacity for it. Because when you're under super high suboptimal state of stress, and I'm not talking the affective hypervigilance, I'm talking you are now out of control in terms of your responses, you actually shrink your cognitive load, what you can actually take in. So in many ways, that self-regulatory skill is not only reducing the cognitive load that's being used, but it's actually increasing the capacity you have available to use.
Yeah, an example comes to mind, which is one of the shootings that we debriefed. When you watch the body-worn camera, one of the officers who just kind of came upon the problem, was not part of the team, but arrives on scene right after two officers have been shot and the suspect has been shot, just starts walking around the field. You watch the body-worn camera and you just see them just walking around the field. They're doing nothing effective, just kind of walking around the area kind of in squares. And, in the process, the debrief is like, well, what are they doing? And everybody said, I don't know. And it strikes me that what they're doing is they're so overwhelmed by events that's what they have. They have the ability to walk around in a square. And like you've moved down the cognitive Maslow triangle, right? You've lost the ability to perceive anything beyond just walking around in a square.
Yeah, and you also reduce your responses that you have available to select from. And I don't know why the walking in squares came up. That would be interesting to actually explore why it was at that. But they couldn't get out of that loop because that was the only available response they could select from in that moment, because the level of stress shrink that accessible knowledge to where that was the only thing available.
Which I guess is part of, a big part of what we talked about in building capacity is building that stress tolerance, right? It's building, and as we've moved away from stress academies for law enforcement, and we've, kind of moved to an environment where, we don't want to yell at people and we don't want to make them tired and we don't want to harass them. We're doing ourselves a great disservice because we're setting people up to make them more likely to be overwhelmed. Like, we need to be stressed in training.
Yeah, stress inoculation has been proven over and over to be an effective way to teach somebody how to increase their stress tolerance. Has to be done effectively, because one of the things that I don't think many people realize is, let's say yelling is the stressor in my training, but then in my operating environment, let's say the propensity for yelling, it's probably low for whatever this task is, just for the sake of example. I know it's not always low, but the stressor, let's say, is time in my real operating environment. But I was trained being yelled at, and then, oh, wait, why can't you transfer that stress inoculation? You could perform well being yelled at. Why aren't you transferring it to being able to do it in less time? Different stressors have different effects. We inoculate to stressors as they're presented. If I get better at performing with people yelling at me in the field, I'll be better when people are yelling at me. I won't necessarily be better when other stressors are presented. So Yeah, stress inoculation is funny. Is we have to really be specific about the stressors. What are most likely to be experienced out in the field or on the street? And then those are the stressors that should be progressively increased. Not all at once, but it is progression so the person stays in that stretch zone, that adaptability corridor, and builds adaptive capacity and stress tolerance tools in conjunction with each other.
So in a tactical environment, your day job and my client's day job, yelling at you is maybe not the best stressor. Maybe it is time compression. It's distraction. It's, give me some examples. If you were building a training curriculum for a SWAT team, what are the kinds of stressors you want to apply versus don't want to apply?
I would look and I would meet with the people who are on, let's say, the SWAT team. And I would say, what are the stressors that tend to be present most often? And then also, what are the unexpected ones that tend to throw you off? I'd kind of debrief them with that. Then I would backwards plan the training to progressively amp up the stressors that are almost always present. And then also insert in unexpected manner the ones that tend to throw them off, that don't always happen, but they are unexpected and can throw them off. That's how I would do it. I'm not saying that yelling is always wrong. If there's yelling in the performance environment, there should be yelling in the training environment. They should just mirror each other as much as feasible and possible in that training environment. So yeah, I would just meet with the people who are out there doing the job and then work with them to backwards plan those similar stressors in a progressive manner.
What's interesting about that though is in my career, I've attended over 1,000 debriefs, right? In the last 38 years, I've been through 1,000 plus debriefs and I've interviewed a lot of people and worked with a lot of teams that have had shootings. And it's interesting as you're saying that, what I'm thinking of are the things that people report back, what they describe as traumatic about these operating environments is often not somebody shooting at them. It's kids being present. It's fire alarms going off. It's sprinklers going off. It's, bodies being present or the smell of blood. It's things that they aren't exposed to in a training environment that seem to imprint very deeply.
Yes, and that makes sense because the unexpected can be extremely stressful in and of itself. And then now you add the component of, there's such an emotional component around children being present in any stressful environment. So then now, in an officer's mind in that situation, now there's children present. I haven't trained that. Let's say this is a novice level officer. That would be extremely traumatic because in their mental model, they think children shouldn't be here. So in a way, they actually start fighting reality a little bit in that moment. And this is where we go into that, as granted, like this is how the environment's unfolding. You can't fight the fact that a child is now present here. You have to deal with that fact and accept it to be able to move on. So yeah, I think you're 100% right because the unexpected from a survival mechanism, those imprint and are more stressful simply because they're unexpected. So the more we can insert them, and we don't have to think of them all because there's no way we ever will, but there does have to be an element of that in training where it's not working out exactly as you anticipated it working out. There's an adaptive component that they have to almost problem solve around or emotionally cope with.
And I think it's easy to overlook in training, right? It's easy to overlook, like it's complicated to plan, unexpected in training. Right? It's complicated to spray your guys with sprinklers. It's complicated to have loud music. It's complicated to, have things happen that are unexpected. It's, I think of in terms of medical response, and the teams that I've seen that have performed at the highest levels of medical response are the teams that integrated it into their training all the time. Somebody got shot in every training exercise practically, and you had to now put a tourniquet and move them. And you look at the teams that do that, and then when it happens, they're surgical. They're deliberate. They don't even emotionally modulate with it. It's just something that we trained. And I think it really speaks to training design for teams to throw chaos and irregularity and unexpected things into training on a regular basis. So when it does show up, it doesn't overmodulate everybody on the team instantly.
Yes. And it is hard to think of how, to plan that in there, but maybe the goal ends up being one unexpected thing every 2 or 3 scenarios or something like that, to where it's not overwhelming for the person who's planning the training, but it's also at least addressed to some level. And I think the mindset around training has to change to being in stretch zone moments. The point of training is not to be perfect on every iteration. And I think sometimes situations are designed for success. And I'm not saying designed to get a gotcha and design it for failure, but it has to design to get the person out of their stretch zone. A successful training isn't one where every single person walks away and did the right thing. That just wasn't a challenging training in my viewpoint. Everyone was in their comfort zone. Great. But really, how are you going to build the adaptive capacity? You have to train in that stretch zone. But you do have to have moments where you go back to the comfort zone for some confidence, but that shouldn't be where you're living.
Yeah, I think that's an extremely important point, right? Is that training is, it's not designed to make you fail, but training is designed to test the edge of your ability. And if it's not testing the edge of your ability, it's like going into the gym and doing bench press with 10 pounds. You're not going to get stronger.
Exactly.
Right? Every time you lift, it's got to be right on the edge of, man, this is almost too heavy.
Exactly. Maybe not every time you lift, because then you might go into overtraining, but you definitely have a systematic progression. And I think that's the same when you look at tactical training. There's a systematic progression. And I've been in training environments where they were living in their stretch zone for 10 months straight. And I mean, these are highly experienced people just living in their stretch zone. It's hard. So I do think there has to be this element of like, you're living in your stretch zone, but then you come back a little bit to top off that stress reservoir. And then you go back, live in your stretch zone so that you can actually increase the capacity of that stress reservoir over time.
Yeah, I mean, you're an ultra runner. I'm an Ironman distance triathlete. Like, people go, oh man, you did an Ironman. You're fit for the rest of your life. No, you stop being fit the day of Ironman. Actually, arguably stop being fit a couple of weeks before Ironman. But like it is not, you're driving towards a peak with those kinds of events. And that's not what we're looking for in a tactical environment, right? We're looking for an optimal level of performance, not a peak level of performance. So there's got to be this kind of train, recover mindset.
100%.
Which also, I think, goes into kind of our third point, which is resilience, right? It's longevity and resilience. And, how do we not only build good operators, but build good operators that are going to last 20 years? And, I know you've done a lot of work in this area, and I kind of like to just press on resilience a little bit. Like give me the buckets of resilience.
So we've got physical, which would be exactly what it sounds like. So your ability to recover from injury, also avoid it, because sometimes we do just overtrain or we get ourselves in situations that we don't need to be in, sometimes due to decision making. And then maintaining that physical capacity, and how we train as we age has to change as well. How we train at 25 is not going to be the same thing that keeps us uninjured at 45. So there's the physical component, the cognitive component on, do you retain the cognitive skills at the same level, at least, if not even higher than when you entered the force? And when I'm talking about that, that's your observation skills, your memory, your decision-making, creative and critical thinking, your ability to mitigate your own biases, those type of things. And then the emotional aspect, in terms of managing chronic stress, having emotional stamina to where you can keep going in a way where you're coping effectively. I think people keep going in a way that's coping ineffectively, and then at some point they hit a thing where they just can't keep going. And then the last one we've got is that spiritual and philosophical aspect, which I think is usually underrepresented when talking about resilience. And this is what grounds you. A tower only rises as deep as its foundation. And sometimes that tower has grown and it almost gets lifted out of its foundation. We have to always reground ourselves in our why. What is our purpose beyond ourselves? And that can be the tribe, the brotherhood, the sisterhood. It can be the purpose of serving. Whatever that may be, it is systematically grounding yourself, not just saying the words, but truly feeling that sense of purpose. And then I am a huge fan of Stoicism in terms of how it teaches people to think about really hard situations. The Romans did go through a lot of hard times. And I think through that, they've left a body of philosophy that tells us how to survive and thrive in those hard times.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about spirituality, you're spiritual and philosophical. Like, for you, that could be your religion.
It could be, yes.
But
for many people, it is.
But it doesn't have to be, right? It can be grounded in, what Simon Sinek called the why, what your why is. It could be grounded in just your philosophical approach, but there has to be kind of that, philosophical component to your existence that allows you to, again, to refill the well periodically.
Yes. Yep. It's checking up on that foundation. Are there cracks in it? And I really think the spiritual component, whether it's religion or not, and I personally am not a highly religious person. I'm highly spiritual and philosophical. And it's that grounding in the why, in the values, and a purpose outside of myself. And I do think there's a mindset to the spiritual component as well. But we have to stay connected to that. I think once we become disconnected, we become disconnected to others as well. I think those two tend to go hand in hand.
Yeah, one of the things I teach when I teach culture-centric leadership is the organization, any organization, to have a correct culture has to have a why. And the why has to resonate, and it has to resonate with everybody in the organization. And the why, generally speaking, has to be about people. Like it's as much as we think, oh, I'm motivated by success, I'm motivated by money. The people that find success and money and are empty inside afterwards, it's because there wasn't that connection to humanity. And I think that connection, in the case of a tactical unit, may be the brotherhood, but it is finding that purpose and making sure that everybody is agreeing on that purpose and that they all have a why. Even if it's not exactly the same, they all have a why that they come back to.
Yeah, and I even think revisiting it together is helpful. I know it sounds kind of soft or whatnot, but when you can get a group of people to talk about the purpose of what they do at a profound level, that runs deep. It's not just reflecting on it yourself. It's also how can you bring others into that purpose?
Which is the role, one of the primary roles of leadership, right? Like that is my job as a CEO, is to create culture. It's to give everybody the why. Like what does the organization exist for, and why are we here? And making sure that as an organization, we are remaining grounded in that why, because I think that the loss of that allows us to kind of go adrift.
Yeah, and there's a term, I forget who termed it, operator drift within the military community. And it's this slow drift that happens without even people noticing, because it happens so subtly over time. And, it might be where, one drink a night becomes 2 drinks a night, becomes 3 drinks a night, and it just progresses very slow where no one is noticing how far off a person is from their baseline of who they are and how they used to be. Because it's happening so slow, they keep forming a new normal. So we never have this drastic comparison point. And then once it kind of drifts too far, it's a lot harder to bring them back in, but that's when they really need to be brought back in. But how do we notice that drift before it does get to that point? And that's where I think it's checking on your tribe. It's those, little calls here and there when you're thinking about that person who may be going through a tough time. And that I think even a role for different things like biofeedback to see, okay, really, what is the state of my nervous system? That's essentially what it's telling us. And then that can be one marker of physiological and even some emotional aspects will play into that. How's the person's sleep? All of these over time, it paints a picture and tells a story. And I think we just need to listen to it before something catastrophic happens. And it's usually when something catastrophic happens that everybody is now attuned and listening. But it's because that drift happened so slowly that we didn't see it. But in hindsight, we see it very clearly.
Well, and it's tragic, right? Like it is amazing. I mean, both of us are dealing with SOF units and tier 1 units, and like it's amazing how many of our nation's best warriors, right? People that we have deified, lose their way towards the end of their careers and leave their units in disgrace because of drinking problems or because of extramarital affairs. It is terrible how many of them are ending their lives with suicide. You talk to any of the tier 1 units, and the majority of them have lost more people to suicide than they have to combat.
Yeah.
And it's just that little bit of drift.
Yep. And it's so subtle. And we have to really pay attention to the small things, because if we wait for the big thing, it is going to be the big thing. So what are the small things that each organization, each leader, each officer, each military member can start to, okay, here's the thing I'm going to look for in my buddy. Like, here's their baseline. Here's how they used to be when I met them. And really take the time to think, okay, how were they when I met them? Okay, you're seeing that drift a bit more, and then everyone's going to have their unique way they want to be brought back in, but sometimes it's just being asked and seeing that people will rally around you that helps that person come back into the purpose. It's the purpose and the tribe. They really matter.
Well, and I think from an individual standpoint, it's also surrounding yourself with people who will check on you. It's surrounding yourself with people and giving them permission. You know, for me, I've been married for 34 years. That is a big function that my wife performs of saying, hey, like, dumbass, you're working too hard. Like, you need to slow down. You're not sleeping enough. You know, you start to act like a jerk. And then taking the moment to go, okay, hold on. Don't get angry. Don't react to this. Really assess where I am here and allow the tribe to pull you back into the village before they have to throw you out of the village. Yeah, that's powerful. So one last area I'd like to kind of touch on here is, and I've heard you describe it as building your armor, building the mechanisms of resilience. Let's kind of just walk through, I've heard you describe it as physical, kind of self, which is, kind of emotional, and then external. Why don't we start with physical? How do I build my physical? Well, actually, before we go there, talk to me about how resilience is built. Bottom up, top down, like explain that to me.
It's built both ways, bottom up and top down. And that's where I talked about the breath control and these physiological methods. And some of this bottom up will be sleep, physical movement, nutrition. This is happening at a physiological level. So when I say bottom up, I'm speaking physiological to brain. And then when I say top down, it's thoughts downward that actually start to affect physiology. So I think we build it both ways. And the way that we actually have this pictured is in a pyramid. And at the base is the physical self. We have 3 relationships, and those 3 relationships are physical, self, and others. And our physical self is at that base, and that's movement, not just exercise, but how are you just moving around on a daily basis, or are you sedentary most of the time? There's a huge body of research right now on being sedentary and how that leads to various degradations in capacity, whether it be physical, cognitive, or emotional. Exercise, which is, getting whatever it is that your required dose may be, and being more intentional about it. Sleep and nutrition. And I think when you look at the op tempo of many tactical communities, they don't seem in alignment with being able to take care of the physical self. So I think we see either it be from trauma or from the perceived lack of time. I think sleep is one of the first things that starts to go. And if I'm looking at any operator for drift, that I think it's a very early signal. It's not like something's going to happen, because I think, the majority of people aren't sleeping well. But I do think it's one of the things that can lead to other downstream effects. So I would prioritize, okay, how is that person optimizing their sleep? If you can't get more, let's work on quality. If you can get more, let's figure out how, and let's take care of the root problem. If you're not sleeping, you probably will stop exercising, and you will probably throw nutrition out the window. They kind of come in pairs. So we look at optimizing all of those and working within the person's schedule, identifying even short times. Maybe you don't have time for a 30 or 45-minute workout, but maybe you have time for a 10-minute bit here, and then a 10-minute here, and then maybe another 10-minute later. It's just figuring out within that person's op tempo, how can we get in at least a half hour of total physical activity, whether that happens all in one dose or not. That's going to kind of be up to the op tempo and the context. So really working within the reality of that person's environment versus like, here's the optimal thing to do for sleep. You need 7 to 8 hours. And right away they throw it out because it's like, well, I can't do that. So thanks. You're of no help. So we're looking, how do we meet them where they're at and optimize what we can? And then with the self, did you have something, John?
Yeah. Let me ask you a question on that. So we tend to think of like, okay, I have a very physical job. I work construction. Oh, that's my exercise. But I think you would probably argue that there's a whole emotional component to exercise that is not met. So if you're an operator and you're training all day and you're doing movement and all that, that might be meeting your movement quotient, but it may not be meeting your exercise quotient.
Exactly. Yeah. We actually separate movement and exercise because yes, if you have a physical job, you are getting your movement, but are you getting your exercise where your heart rate is at an elevated level for X amount of time and you're doing strategic things to build the foundations of physical movement from strength to endurance, whatever it might be that would be best for your job. But to say you're in shape because you're moving through the day, that is not accurate because they affect the body in very different ways and both are needed.
And from a, I probably 5 or 6 years ago started to really take sleep seriously. Cold bed, cold room, dark windows, no caffeine, deep sleep. And it was unbelievable how it affected everything else. Like, your blood work, your weight, your, how you think, how much energy you have during the day. Like, I think it's very easy to undervalue sleep as kind of the anchor. And there's Matthew Walker's book that says basically that's when the repair work takes place. And if you're not sleeping, you're not repairing. You're just gradually degrading.
Yeah, and that's same for the brain. Many times we think it's for the body, but sleep is actually even more important for the brain. Obviously, it's important for everything, but it is literally the only time the brain is able to regenerate the damage that it's done. And through every single day, we have micro traumas in our brain, and we usually don't think about that. But just in the same way as we use a muscle and over time, we'll actually start to get micro trauma in the muscle, then it repairs itself and then it gets bigger. I mean, that's how essentially muscle's built. The same is true of our brain. And the only time it can do that rebuilding and that regeneration is during sleep itself. And each stage of sleep, I could nerd out forever on this, but each stage of sleep actually has an important function. I think a lot of times we're chasing deep sleep and it's at the expense of some other stages. And many times, especially with those who are chronically sleep deprived, they're going into REM earlier than they normally would because there's an REM rebound that happens with chronic sleep deprivation. So no, you're not getting the level of deep sleep because you're in REM because your brain's actually really smart and it's trying to make up for the REM that you've been missing. So I think it is important to realize, yes, deep sleep is important, but so are all the other stages. And when we start to use these wearables and rely on them to tell us our quality of sleep, many of them, especially using the optical sensors, are not going to be highly accurate. The sleep quantity time is likely accurate for most of them, but the sleep quality, it's not. And I see people actually start making significant adjustments to things that were actually working because they think they're not getting deep sleep because the watch is telling them that. And I'm like, well, how do you feel? Well, I feel fine. It's like, you need to go with how you feel more on that piece when it comes to the sleep quality. Because I have seen it lead people astray and even get overly anxious about not getting quality sleep because their watch is telling them that they're not, but really they are.
Yeah, that's one of the, there's an upside to gamifying things, which is it focuses your attention and makes you, change habits. But the downside to gamifying things is that you can actually become, too obsessed with it. You see people with diet where they become orthorexic, where like it has to be, oh man, I didn't get a purpose. I had 5 too many calories today. And like the same is true with sleep. Like you have to enjoy it. Like it can't be, but it's also, I think that people undervalue that Ambien does not produce normal sleep. A pint of bourbon does not produce normal sleep. Eating right before you go to bed does not produce normal sleep. Like there's all these things related to sleep hygiene that we tend to forget and then not understand why the next day we're foggy or we're not moving as well or we don't think as well.
And I'm glad you mentioned that there are positive things. I'm not completely anti wearables and whatnot, but it's being smart about how you're using it. If it's changing behaviors in an effective way, go ahead. If you're starting to change things that are working because you think it's not working because your wearable is telling you, that's where you might want to get a second opinion on that aspect. But yeah, the value of sleep, it really can't be overstated. And I think people are tired of hearing about it, but I also think that it is the anchor, like you called it. And I love that word for it because I think it anchors every other behavior.
Well, and in this community, sleep is abundant. Like, let's just call it what it is. Like, I don't know any operator that gets enough sleep or takes it seriously enough. It is the nature of the work, the nature of the assignments, the coming home amped up from an operation and trying to fall asleep. And like there is a lot to it. Let's talk a minute. We kind of went through, the 5 perceptions, but from a self standpoint, how do we build our armor for self?
The first is the perception, and we did go through the 5. Just a reminder, here now, as is, as granted, release, and effortless virtuous action. And then purpose. So this is going back to that spiritual and philosophical aspect, is how are you connecting with your self's purpose in a very meaningful way? And continuous development and learning, actually. As human beings, we have this innate drive to want to be better and to evolve. So it's how are we systematically setting that up in our environment to where we feel like we're evolving and gaining mastery over our environment and tasks, and so we can have self-mastery. So those would be the 3 with our relationship to ourself. Did you have any questions around any of those?
No, I think I think that is, I think you nailed that. Yeah, it is really kind of finding that self, though, and not, we tend to focus too much on the physical and lose self pretty easily.
Yeah, and if you think about the pyramid, I was saying like physical is the foundation, relationship with self is that one level up. So if our physical aspect is all gone haywire, that middle layer is a lot harder as well. It's far harder to have effective perceptions of reality when you're not sleeping, you're not working out, you're getting crappy nutrition. But then it's also another control mechanism that if we don't feel like we have control over the physical, okay, then can we take some control over the self that actually might help us get more control over the physical? So I think we can work them both ways. I think they affect each other as well.
The final one is external. Talk to me about that.
This is all about your connection with others, your tribe, who you've chosen to surround yourself with. And are they influencing you in a positive or meaningful way? Or are they potentially bringing you to your bad habits? And maybe it's your comfort zone and you've got that buddy who will always, go have the drink with you, but are they serving you in a meaningful way in your life that helps you keep going in a sustainable manner? And within that, we build our tribe, but then there's also tribes we have to leave. And we discussed that state of liminality. And this actually I heard this first from Dr. Preston Klein with the Mission Critical Teens Institute. He had come for a visit and he explained liminality. And I thought it was very powerful. It's this state of being in between tribes. And this could happen if you're transitioning units, you're transitioning stations, you're retiring. Any transition where you are leaving your old tribe and you're not yet accepted into your new tribe is a state of liminality. And it's very hard for human beings because we are tribal in nature. We are very social beings. Our brains are actually built to be social. And when we aren't part of a tribe, we feel a bit lost and it's highly stressful. So when we're in that state, we actually have to double down on, okay, who still supports me? Who do I still have by my side? And it doesn't have to be a ton of people. They just have to be meaningful people. It's actually better to have meaningful connections than a lot of connections. So it's regrounding yourself. There are still people there. Who are they? And then you slowly start to build that tribe around you again.
But I think it's a very valid point. And it is, we are hardwired. Our survival depends. Human beings only get to be, what we are now because of our ability to cooperate, because of our connection, because of our, our communication skills. And especially in transitions in leadership, transitions in tribes, and especially when guys are retiring, right, or they're leaving units, you see guys go adrift. And it seems now, 40 years into this, the ones that don't go adrift, the guys that don't drink too much and go out and find hookers and cocaine and whatever, are always the ones that have good friends outside of the job. They have a family that they're connected to and kids that they love and participate with. It is maintaining more than one tribe and being connected to those tribes consistently.
Yes. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. Whenever someone is transitioning out of the military, because that's where I've worked the most, we recommend they read The Second Mountain, because that's talking about a purpose beyond the achievement. The first mountain's all about individual achievement. And I'm going to get this rank, I'm going to get this position, I'm going to get this. And it's like all of these external things we're going to achieve and kind of put on our resume. The second mountain actually becomes more about your eulogy virtues and how are you going to serve the world through living your purpose and your values versus the resume virtues. And that transition, I think, is big when people are looking at, okay, what is my life outside of the tactical space? And I think reading that book can help someone see it doesn't have to be just taking another job in the tactical space. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. And it doesn't also mean you have to leave it completely. I think the second mountain opens up options for people to think about what's next in a different manner than I think what is the tendency to think, well, what's the next achievement? And then I would also look at their tribe. If they don't have a strong one outside of work currently, I would try to get them connected with a new tribe before they fully leave their old tribe and have someone actively helping them find that new tribe. And that's where I think, veterans groups, first responder groups, all those type of things, I think those are huge when people are transitioning because it's at least a group that feels like the old one and people who can relate to me. And I think that's where people can start building up that new tribe.
I love that. Yeah. So I think probably the one thing I'd ask now, Brittany, is how can people follow your work? Where can people find you, find what you're writing about, find what you're talking about?
My website's probably the best because I have a page where it's the content and various appearances. It's elite-cognition.com. Don't forget the dash in between elite and cognition.com. And then you can also follow me on LinkedIn at Brittany Loney.
Beautiful. Brittany, thank you so much for spending this time with me. You've definitely made me smarter in the process, and I appreciate everything you're doing for the community.
Thank you so much. It was such an honor to be able to speak with your audience.